Good morning. Thank you very much for coming to this session about accessibility and rolling stock. We'll do some introductions first, and then we're going to ask the panel a few questions, discuss through with level boarding and how it's not the end of making accessibility and change. We've got that for a few questions that we've pre-devised, and then we'll come to yourselves with some questions as well. So that's the format of this morning. So who am I? I'm Dominic Van Conlon. I'm the Accessibility Inclusion Lead at Rail Delivery Group. If I was asked for a visual description of me today, I'm a white bloke in a wheelchair wearing a shirt that's rolled up at the sleeves and has far too much texture for the budget range. You can read into that whatever you want. To my left, Andy.
Morning. So Andy Bagguley, Fleet Services Director at Porterbrook. For visual description, I'm a white male, middle-aged, what some may say, white shirt and a blue shirt, blue suit, sorry, but less texture.
Emma.
Good afternoon, Dr. Emma Partlow, Chief Executive Officer of NCAT, National Centre for Accessible Transport. Visual description, I'm a white woman with dark brown hair, wearing black trousers, black pointy shoes, a black and white patterned blouse, a very orange high-vis that they insisted I put on at the entrance, and at my feet is Luna, my yellow assistance dog, wearing her red and yellow vest.
And Hannah.
I'm Hannah Cotton-Diederich. I'm the Accessibility Strategy Manager at West Midlands Trains. I am a white woman wearing black trousers, white T-shirt and a very colourful rainbow scarf.
It's a good scarf. So let's do a quick icebreaker a minute, because job descriptions, they don't normally say much beyond the title. So can I ask each of you, in about 30 seconds, what does the word accessibility mean to you, and how do you make sure that with that, how your work is contributing to a better customer outcome? Andy?
I think for me, working as an engineer in the rail market, looking at rolling stock, what we're talking about today, accessibility, the obvious one we talk about a lot is step-free access. But accessibility, when we explore it deeper, is a lot broader. There are a lot of different aspects that we need to consider from a technical and engineering design perspective, and that's hopefully where I can try and influence this industry.
Thank you. Emma.
30 seconds, gosh, okay. Accessibility for me is personal as well as professional. I bring my own lived experience to my professional role. And when I think about it on a personal level, it's having passenger experiences where there are no barriers, or those barriers are reduced in a way that is meaningful to me. Thinking about who we think about when we think about accessibility. Who do we have in mind? More often than not, that is a wheelchair user or mobility impairments, but really recognising that accessibility is a real broad range of experiences and impairments. Professionally, how does our work and how does my role feed into a better customer journey? We're an evidence centre. Our role is purely to create data, evidence and research around what works, what the barriers are, but also making recommendations, best practice, to really support yourselves and various transport and industry stakeholders to take those recommendations, adopt them, and really with our support ensure that evidence is driving the work that you're doing and leading to better outcomes.
Thank you, Hannah.
So accessibility for me, I think, again, two things, a bit like Emma in terms of personal and professional. When I started in accessibility, it was very much on a professional level in terms of how do we actually make our trains inclusive and someone's journey inclusive. From end to end, not just the starting point. And then around 5-6 years ago, it then became more personal for me and gave me a bit more lived experience around accessibility and what it was like to be travelling by train and having different needs that you quite often don't see. So for me, accessibility, we just need to ensure that we bring everyone along on our journey and we actually provide those services, whether it's in infrastructure, whether it's in our rolling stock or whether it's in our customer experience.
Thank you. So, I mean, it's probably fair to say rail's come a long way in a decade, 2 decades. You know, I'm very fortunate and privileged in a way to have a very visible disability. So while I've always been impacted, people have always been able to quickly identify a disabled person, need to make sure that we provide some access. And that's probably the biggest change that I've seen in rail, is that change in attitude of accessibility being, you know, a very, very nice thing to do for the disabled people, to an inclusion and equity aspect for people, of ensuring that everything that we do is thinking about the customer, a consistent experience. and particularly sort of things like that now customers can pre-book up to 2 hours before they travel or turn up and go if they prefer. There's no requirement for that pre-booking aspect. The ORR has been very prescriptive with the accessible travel policies. And that's also reflected through on the procurement side for people like Porterbrook that trains, we're looking for more and more features that are inclusive for customers. So university accessible toilets, seats that are priority seats that customers can see the information screens. It's an ongoing journey to make things just a much better experience for customers overall. And it leads sort of neatly to the first question of, what challenges are we facing to making rail more accessible, and particularly from a customer perspective, as they move through the journey of planning it, getting to the station, getting on the train, making that journey and leaving. It's a whole experience. So I'm going to go down the other end, if that's all right. Hannah, do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the biggest challenges we face as an operator is the difference in rolling stock and understanding a customer doesn't know what type of train they're going to be getting on their journey. So how do we provide a consistent and comfortable customer experience for everybody who travels on whatever train they're on? Our newer trains, the 730s and 196s are great. They've got more space, more accessibility features, but then we're faced with the older types of train which don't have those. So as an example, you can go on one train and the call for aid button looks totally different than if you go onto a different train. So for customers, how do we provide a consistent journey? We know passenger assistance isn't just about the accessibility of a train or a station. It's about that end-to-end journey, and it's about how do we deliver that? How do we make ourselves better so we're actually inclusive? People can socially, they can come and they can interact and they can be part of society, and we're providing that service to people to deliver that for them. So we have a massive responsibility, and how do we change? How do we ensure that somebody can go on a 730 or 350, whatever train it may be, and have that consistent experience?
Emma.
Yeah, when I think about our evidence base and what the evidence tells us, I think exactly what you've said, Hannah. And I think it's quite easy to fall into this trap and think about people's journey. We're all here, and supposedly, people standing in this field and sitting in this field here today know a lot about rolling stock and the railway industry. Most disabled passengers do not, and people just want to get from A to B. But thinking about the purpose of that journey as well, what we know is that people are thinking about their journey long before they're entering that rolling stock and boarding. They're thinking about planning, they're thinking about wayfinding. Information is really key. People need information about what is available to them, and indeed about passenger assistance. There is no rule book. If you suddenly become disabled or you acquire an injury or an illness, you're not presented with a book to say these are your rights. This is what you can access when you get on a train. I think, we spoke about privilege. Dominic, you spoke about privilege of visible impairment. I sit here really privileged that I know my rights and very happy to be vocal about those when things don't always go to plan. But people don't know what they can get all the time. So I think giving people that information and being really open and transparent around what people can access. People's journeys don't start when they board a particular vehicle or mode of transport. And we know through the evidence that people often take several modes of transport. So whilst we're here thinking about rail, actually bearing in mind that people might be entering your station or a rolling stock having taken various modes of transport, and they will come with all of those experiences and prior experiences with them. In terms of what we can do and thinking about making that journey more inclusive, we hear time and time again through the evidence and through the voices of disabled people that if people have an experience that perhaps isn't what they expected, which I think goes back to this point, information and managing expectations, letting people know what to expect. And I know there are some fantastic initiatives where people try trains and can really try and experience the rail industry. If people don't know what to expect, that makes them quite nervous, apprehensive, and if they have an experience that doesn't match what they had in mind, they're more likely to be nervous and not travel again, which I think is something we all really need to keep in mind. People's journeys don't just end the minute they leave as well. They carry those with them, and that will influence their confidence, their independence, and potentially whether they get on board again in the future, or whether they would rush to make future journeys by rail or other modes.
Thanks. And Andy, particularly, I think your challenge, making rail accessible is probably much harder than even maybe our own at the coalface, because you're given a specification, usually a piece of paper and, hey, provide that. So what challenges are you facing in that particularly?
It's a really good point, and I think the challenge with the specification, and I liken this to the automotive industry, we are very regulated in rail, which is great. It keeps us safe and it gives us a great railway. But the problem we've got is we design to requirements or to specification. If car manufacturers built a car to the minimum legal standards, nobody would buy it, because travel is something we enjoy. The reason somebody will pay more for a car will because they enjoy that experience. And this is the bit we miss in rail. Because of the high costs and because of the way the current structure, hopefully the previous, when we move into a new GBR world, is set up, it is largely a race to the bottom in terms of cost, based on minimum standards and arguably requirements where we can get them in a cost envelope. That delivers a product that is compliant. Is it desirable to everybody? No. And I think this is the challenge we have. If we want, and this links into, for me, the growth of rail, and rail is a bigger transport mode. If we really want modal shift, we want rail to become preferred for everybody, not just people with additional needs, whether it be disabled needs or accessibility. We need to make it better. We make it more desirable. If we look at the people who struggle the most with the railway we've got or need the most support, if we design for that, we get a better railway for everybody. Everybody. And that's something I think we really miss out on. You always got to design for a percentage. We get that in certain areas. But I do think we're missing the point that if we make rail enjoyable as an experience, more people will use it. That's a fact. We know that. That's human behaviour. So I think from the challenge of a design, we need to take minimum requirements and standards, but we need to build on that. We need to get the reason. I did a lot of accessibility work in my former role at East West Rail, where I was head of rolling stock, and we had an accessibility advisory panel helping us, engineers and people who are based in rail and use rail every day and don't see the challenges that other people who use it less frequently or need different needs, to try and build that into those real initial requirements to go, let's take it above the standard. Standard that shouldn't even be considered anymore. We need to make rail a desirable place for people to use as alternative transport.
And I think you raise a really good point there, because that wonderful segue. It's almost like we planned this, of about that experience of working with people with lived experience, of buying in their lived experience. And when I spoke earlier, I said I have that privilege of being a visibly disabled person. People are, how can we fix this? Because they can see that disability there, it's quite easy to understand, but actually disability is a very vast spectrum. And so really my next question is about, what is your experience of working, buying in the lived experience, and how has it benefited your rail experience? And if I can go to you first, and just build on your point there.
Yeah, I think something that really honed in for me, again, in my former role at East West Rail, we were at a conference in Amsterdam and spent some time with a lady called Christiana Link, who's in a wheelchair, who was part of the accessibility advisory panel we had. And the conference was relatively accessible, but then we went out for lunch. And not on the train, obviously, but we just went out for lunch around Amsterdam. And the challenge that Christiana had to find somewhere to have lunch, it wasn't just about getting over the step. That was the first step. Could we get through the door? And you wouldn't believe how many places we had to walk past went, no. I'm in a fortunate position. When I go for lunch, my decision is based on what I feel like eating. For us working with Christiana on that day, it was like, where can physically you get in? And once you're in, can you get out? Can you access the toilet? There were so many things that and it was upsetting. It was very eye-opening for me. And taking that experience, accepted it wasn't on rail, but understanding the challenge that faces people with disabilities and additional needs every single day. Rail can't be another step on top of that. We need to flip that and go. If you want to travel on the train, we talk about the accessibility, the turn up and go, and the 2 hours it's reduced to. We need to have a railway where you turn up. You know, you can book a ticket, you can just turn up the station and get on a train. Not worry about, has the station I get off at going to be able to meet my needs? Can I get off the train okay again? And that's where, as an engineer, for me, I need to spend time with people with these needs, because it's very hard to contextualise for yourself if you don't live and breathe. And you know, it's great to hear both your two reflection on your own needs. You understand it and you live it. We need to roll that out much wider and get the people who are in the design rooms and the people who are at the funding end of it understanding that we need to design a much more inclusive railway.
Yeah, absolutely right. And that point, the term we used is allyship. You know, basically advocating for another group of people, and that's quite important. I want to come to yourself, Hannah, on this, because you have a customer panel at the moment. I know you've been doing some work, for example, on the Telford line, where you've been using and employing somebody with lived experience to give input to a project. So could you tell us a bit more, building on Andy's point, about the benefits of it, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Andy makes a good point, and I sort of refer to it as our standards and our compliance should be the floor of where we start, and then everything else is the ceiling. And that's how do we as an organisation understand what that is for people and for customers? So we've done a lot of work with one particular stakeholder who supported the delivery of assistance waiting spaces at stations. So something really simple as putting an area on the platform where there are no staff, so you're reliant on the member of staff on the train to provide assistance. So something as simple as that made the journey for this individual so much more accessible and inclusive. He wanted to travel to football matches. It was really simple. You can imagine a train station on the day of a football match, it's packed. The amount of times his experience was poor because actually the train isn't accessible. He needs a ramp to board the train, and the train is packed. So where does he wait? And then the senior conductor doesn't see him because actually there's so many people. Then if they do see him, it was like there's people in the wheelchair space. So working with him was amazing. We've carried on doing work with him across our networks to put in more spaces. He's also supported us in delivering some training to new starters around talking about his experience, so they can get a grasp of, oh, actually, this is the reality. We did some work a while ago as well with Angel Trains around looking at the accessibility of some of the fleets. And I also worked with a charity group called the Together Trust to look at a sensory space and how we're going to start using sensory spaces more. We've popped one in Northampton and we're hoping to put a couple more in. The work with them is absolutely critical because it takes what is that standard or that compliance into human usability. And actually, is it the real world? You know, if someone says, oh yeah, well the rail replacement bus stop's only down there could be absolutely inachievable for somebody, and we absolutely say, well, it's only 10 metres over what it should be, but that makes a difference. And it's about understanding from the people that work with us and support us in terms of that lived experience of how usable is what you're delivering. And just, I think really importantly, equality impact comes into that massively to ensure we're including that social aspect and that social inclusion. And yeah, we've got a really good relationship with our stakeholders, and they will just come along, support us, support projects. They did loads of input on our help points, our OD22s. They went in, they weren't accessible. We got them redesigned alongside our stakeholder group to actually make them usable for more people.
Thanks. And so we covered a bit of what we call co-production, like customer engagement, but the other part about that experience is evidence and data-driven. So Emma, particularly from your experience with NCAT of running those panels that gather the data, how is it benefiting rail experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Some really good points that have been covered so far. So what the evidence shows is that we need to be co-producing, co-designing with people. One of our latest pieces of work has highlighted that the cost of retrofitting, so going back to a station and trying to make things accessible, can be up to £1 million. And can take a really long time. So often having conversations, not just in the rail industry, across all transport modes, it's quite expensive and timely to engage disabled people in a meaningful way, making sure they're paid for their time, expertise, and making sure we're not just talking to one wheelchair user. The saying goes, if you've spoken to one wheelchair user, you've spoken to one wheelchair user. That isn't the whole umbrella of accessibility and disabled experiences. So really recognising there's a need for that diverse representation when you're talking to people and getting that feedback. And absolutely, if you're not getting that early on, there's a real cost. There's a business case there. It might seem like the easiest thing to do a real light touch review or engagement, but actually long term, there's a real economic case to be made there. Our experience of engaging disabled people is that it is timely. It takes time, it takes patience, and we're really proud that we have a panel of over 3,600 people across the UK that are feeding in to our evidence, to our data collection, and we're really committed to working with the rail industry and beyond to ensure that that evidence is where it needs to be. We can do that heavy lifting to support stakeholder engagement activities. We can say we've engaged on a mass level across the UK. This is what people are telling us, and really making sure that data is being baked into decision making, because as we've heard, we need to make sure that compliance is the floor, and we're going over and above that. What we do have coming out that might be of interest to many of you in this space, coming out roughly end of July, but do contact me directly if you can't access that, is a co-production toolkit. We hear time and time again that actually co-design, co-production, people know that they should be doing it, they should be engaging disabled people, but people really lack the know-how. It can be difficult. There's lots of priorities within people's roles and organisations. So we've created a toolkit people can take, open access, free, take that away. So if you're looking at how to bring those voices in, bring those different experiences, that's something you can take away and use. But we're really committed to making sure that all of the stakeholders in this room and beyond have access to that evidence on a mass UK base and level.
That's brilliant. And particularly co-production was used with the current accessibility strategy that was published by DFT last year. And for those who are not aware of the accessibility strategy, you can find it on the DFT website. It's a 2-year plan to the run-up of GBR, and as well as then setting the foundation, if you like, for what the next 30 years can hold, and particularly some of the key things in there are things like procurement policy around now we will only procure level boarding, for example, for trains. So the high floor will be a thing of the past. There's also work in there around better customer information, better customer experience, and working to prevent the opportunity for assistance failures, amongst many things. And with that, and we've got GBR legislation which is going through the House at the moment. There's an opportunity for us in the industry to give a clear message to our leadership to ensure that we take, like somebody's called a once-in-a-generation opportunity to create that biggest lever for change. So what would you all say, would be your message to GBR leadership? And Emma, do you want to come in first on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And at INCUT, we're in close conversation with GBR and really pleased that evidence will be shaping decision-making and feeding in to GBR moving forward. I think my advice would be indeed to do that, be guided by the evidence. I think it's really easy, and this isn't just a rail phenomenon. I think, pick an industry. It's really easy to sit within our space and go, we know what we need to do here. And when you're thinking about accessibility, it's so important that you're looking at the evidence, collecting those experiences, both from disabled people and stakeholders, thinking about frontline staff, thinking about people that are responsible for accessibility on the ground, making sure that evidence, that data, in a really holistic way is guiding decision-making, because it is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and there's a real risk that if evidence isn't underpinning those decisions, that it could be, in 10 years' time, we're talking about retrofitting and talking about having to change processes and policy. So really making sure that evidence and data is guiding those processes across all kinds of all touch points of that passenger journey, and the industry, thinking about, on rolling stock, thinking about what happens when things go wrong, complaints, and thinking about procurement, thinking about the economic case, the business case. When we think about accessibility and the cost of that, if we were to close the transport gap, so that is the gap between the journeys that disabled people take versus non-disabled people, that could be an uplift of 72.4 billion a year. That's a huge amount of money. I think it's very easy to think about accessibility as a cost and not a high-value investment, which is really important as we think about all kinds of big governmental priorities as well, thinking about economic growth, and really shifting that narrative when we think about disability. I won't ask you all, but if I was to say, what do you think of when you think about disabled people, what comes to mind? You would all probably say something fairly similar, but really shifting that narrative. Disabled people are here. 1 in 4 people in the UK identify as disabled, and we want to make journeys. We want to get to work. We want to get to shops, to meet friends, family, and be a part of society. So really shifting the narrative, being guided by evidence, because there is a cost element to this as well as a social good and social value.
Thanks. Andy?
I think my view would be, and we're starting to hear this, which is positive, is have a plan, have a proper plan that goes beyond political cycles. The rail industry needs that. We build HS2. It's a 100+ year infrastructure project. Rolling stock, we procure rolling stock. It's a 35-year life. But if we get that wrong, that's 35 years of baked-in problems that we then try and use excuses why it's too expensive to retrofit, or we'll do it at the next time. So I think for me, the point with GBI is have a strategic plan. We're due to see the rolling stock strategy this summer. But we cannot look at rolling stock as an individual item. It is part of the system. And if we just look at rolling stock and deliver a rolling stock plan without understanding the implications of the station changes that are needed, the road changes that are needed to facilitate proper accessible travel, we will miss a trick again. We will miss the once in a generation chance to do it. So I think that there's that aspect of having a bigger plan. I think the point around cost is brilliant what you just made there. It is all looked at cost, and I know this from procurement of rolling stock over years. Everything you want on top, that's a bit more money it's going to cost you. Yeah, but this is what we need to break. And historically, rolling stock procurement was done by bidders. It was sealed bids, going competitive, scoring. Have you met the minimum standards, the minimum requirements, and anything else? If it was cost, manufacturers wouldn't do it because they would likely lose the bid, and the people bidding it would lose the bid. And this is the cycle that I hope GBR breaks. Let's design rolling stock as part of a transport system for the needs of everybody. Focus on those who need it most. As I said earlier, everybody benefits from that. If we look at step-free access, how many people have got on a train with kids, with suitcases? As we get elderly, up till you're 18 or maybe 15, 16, you're dependent on an adult, getting you over a step. When you get into your 60s and 70s, you probably have additional needs. So it's not just a disabled element as well. It's about travel for everybody to make it easier. I was at York a couple of weeks ago, and there was a couple getting off, elderly couple, probably in the 60s, 70s, with suitcases. Curb platform, they could not clear this gap. I was there and I helped them off with their suitcases, and you could see them kind of figuring out, because they didn't know if the door was going to shut, and it was just, these are the simple things that have no place if we're really going to improve this. And I think GBR have the power to look at this. And when I talk about the system, Greater Anglia, for the rolling stock geeks amongst us will know, a couple of years ago they introduced 2 new fleets. One, step-free, low floor Stadler fleets, great, step extends, brilliant design of rolling stock. And then they had another fleet that wasn't. So that's the first bit. But even the fleet that the Stadler, or the route, sorry, that the Stadler fleet operates on, only 50% of those stations are deemed step-free because the station platform varies in length. Now, I think from a rolling stock perspective, I think let's get the rolling stock right, because believe it or not, and this is probably coming from a rolling stock engineer, platforms are much easier to change than a train is once it's been built. Changing the height and accessibility of a train floor is really difficult once you've built it because of all the stuff we put underneath and the whole design structure. A platform, and there's some great companies here at Rail Live, have a look around, they can raise a platform by 100 millimetres without, but it's cost that at the minute no one's prepared to pay for. It's the old meme where everyone points at somebody else who's going to pick up the cost. But that benefit point of making rail really accessible is GBR need to pull that together. They need to look at the system, they need to look at every aspect of it and go, invest, let's speculate, because we can see what's going to come in over the next decade, not over the next 2 years. Because if you have a 2 to 5 year window, there is no business case. And this is what I feel has stopped rail really progressing in this space historically. So that's what I'd ask GBR to do.
I think it's a very good point. I mean, particularly, the Greater Anglia line is my home line, so, big up a GA massive. Level boarding has made me invisible to staff on a daily basis because I no longer need that assistance. Hannah, particularly from a top perspective.
I think that GBR have the mechanism to move from compliance into measured customer outcomes and measured consistently across the rail network. We need to provide a consistent offering, whether a customer is getting on a train, a GA train or a WMT train as it stands at the minute. That offering needs to be consistent, and we need to measure those customer outcomes. We measure so much around compliance, and we create accountability for that compliance. However, what compliance is there to support the customer? What's the impact on that customer if it's compliant? Is there an impact on that? I think what comes along with compliance and customer satisfaction and customer outcomes is culture. I think GBR has a second opportunity to address the culture around accessibility in rail. I started in rail around 10 years ago, and the amount of people that I interacted with that thought that accessibility and disability was a person using a wheelchair and that's it. They didn't have any understanding of what was different. Well, yeah, there's a ramp and there's this. It's so much more, and it's grown so much. I was at a social mobility event last week, and I was saying to Dom about one of the speakers really resonated with me around what GBR can do and the once-in-a-generation opportunity. And his words were that he kept repeating, we shouldn't leave any one person behind. And actually, that's true. So I should expect to be able to travel as easily as anybody else in this room without any challenges. And that's what GBR have that opportunity. So the data, the planning, the strategy all needs to come together to shape our culture into a culture of, actually, it doesn't matter if I've got a disability, because I'm just going to get on a train, I'm going to travel. It doesn't matter if I've got kids or I'm an older person, or actually I have no disability at all. I just want to travel, and we need to equal that playing field to encourage that social inclusion. So many people rely on transport, not just rail, but they rely on transport to speak to people, to go to day centres, hospital appointments. That is already probably a stressful impact for that customer. We're not making that easier on rail because, like we said, you've got a plan. You know, what do I do if I get there and the lift doesn't work? What do I do if I get on the train and the toilet doesn't work? There's so many factors currently that influence somebody's decision to choose rail that we can shift in this mindset and shift it from compliance to actually usability and the human factors of using rail.
I think you're absolutely spot on there. This is the dangerous bit. This is where we do the audience Q&A. We have somebody with a roving mic, and don't all rush at once. If you've got any burning questions for the panel, this is your opportunity. Do you want to just say your name and where you come from as in an employer, not sort of, I live down there? Yeah.
My name's Melissa, and I work at West Midlands Trains. I think you've touched on briefly the cost of accessibility schemes. When developing these schemes and like building business cases to get things implemented, how do you think we can look or quantify the benefits beyond just the cost and look at the sort of wider economic impacts of the schemes?
That's a good question. That's an expansive question. I like that. So put the money to one side, the economic benefits, the social benefits, how we make sure that we amplify that in business cases. Who wants to go first for that? Emma.
I'm happy to kick off. And what I will signpost you to, on our website there is an economic benefits of accessible transport report. It's about 89 pages long. There's a highlights version, should you want the shorter one. We've scoped this and we've looked at this in real depth. There's lots of mechanisms. There are 5 key recommendations, but to draw on a couple of those, data, but really sharing data. I think we talk about the rail industry, and this is, I think, where GBR comes in. You know, individual companies, actually, if we were to share that data and think about the economic case, that could be really powerful and beneficial. Making sure those silos aren't there, sharing that best practice, sharing what goes into a good business case. But really recognising within those appraisals and in those business cases the economic value, drawing upon the 72.4 billion, looking at the purple pound, looking at that wider high-value investment, because it's still the case, and when you look at some of the mechanisms behind the scenes, that accessibility is still seen as a cost and not an investment. So really flipping that narrative. There's a whole kind of how-to within the document, and it's certainly a piece of work that we're looking to take forward. I think there is a lot that could be done. what the report does reflect on, and we've touched upon this sort of, is actually having that buy-in at leadership level, having your executive team really bought into the idea that accessibility is not a cost. So bringing in lived experience, not just through panels, stakeholder groups, but actually within teams is really powerful, and indeed at executive level, to make sure that cultural recognition and understanding that accessibility is really important and is a high cost, and really feeding into ROI. And if we want to increase passenger numbers, increase revenue growth, accessibility can't be left out of those conversations. So I'll signpost you to the report for some bedtime reading, and would love to hear your further thoughts. There's lots in there.
Hannah, do you want to build, particularly, the economic but also the social side? You said you attended a session about social mobility last week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from the social aspect, how do we tackle accessibility to trains? And I don't necessarily just mean for disabled people, but for all people. So people from lower economic places in society, and people who are very siloed and they're very isolated and on their own. Social mobility plays an important role, because actually behind social mobility and behind the purple pound is money. We very much rely on existing data in this industry to say, oh, how many people are travelling from this station? How many of those people then have passenger assistance? Oh yeah, it's not worth it, because the cost is going to the cost is going to outweigh the benefits. So what we need to look at is actually who could be travelling from those stations, and who could be using rail, and using sources and data like Emma's talked about and that Emma has, to then feed our decisions and make our decisions. I think if we make a journey, an end-to-end journey accessible for one disabled customer, it will benefit every customer. It's not just people with disabilities that it will benefit. It makes it less complicated. It makes it less anxiety-driven. So I think it's very much about, it's not what we're currently doing. We need to look at that data and form our opinion around that. We're going through a process at West Mids at the minute, and we're putting accessibility into our PMO structure to try and get the impact of understanding disability on all of our projects and business changes. That will then feed into that collaboration and that inclusion by design that we really should have. How many times in the railway do people come to us after the project has started halfway through and says, oh, have you got an equality impact assessment? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? We need to change the dial on that in rail, and we need to say, no, this is our project. We need to look at accessibility now and how it's going to influence everybody, and eventually it will drive more passenger growth. We've had a 19% increase year on year with passenger assistance. It just shows that it is just growing and growing, and that's up on pre-COVID. So COVID was obviously a massive game changer. But again, I feel like we're changing again. There's been this shift for more people to be in the office. What happens if the lift is out? So I'm on my way to work. I start work at 9 o'clock, and I get to the station and the lift is out. Am I going to get into trouble because I'm late for work? Am I ever going to make it into work? Who's going to help me up at an unstaffed station? All these things need to be thought about to then impact how we then ensure that we have the growth, the passenger growth, and the accessibility that we need.
Thanks. And Andy, I mean, particularly when you were at East West Rail, you had a business case clearly, but it probably wasn't just money. So that's economic benefit. And so how were disabled people factored into that to empower the team to push for a more inclusive railway?
My time at East West Rail probably wasn't a great example. We've probably all read about East West Rail and the challenges in moving it forward. But it absolutely, and I think the point there was building a new railway is all about how do you calculate what's going to happen. The field of dreams, build it and they will come mentality. And all railways have shown in the UK, new railways have exceeded all expectations in terms of standard Green Book calculations for growth. So that's something to put into it. But I think back to the question you said about business case, and maybe this is a naive view, but I think for when we're talking about accessibility, we need to stop thinking of it as a pure financial business case thing. These are basic human rights for people need to be done. So I think if we take a conventional, what is the business case for this, we're going to go backwards. So I think, again, maybe it's a naive view, but I think these things need to be looked at in a different scoring mechanism, a different assessment around when we're doing these things, why we're doing it. If we just put pounds and pence to it, we would just carry on, unfortunately, in where, you know, the position of an inaccessible railway where we are today. So,
Thank you. Are there any other questions? We've got 2 hands, so we've got about 4 minutes. So we're going to do 2 2-minute questions in that case. We're going to start with a gentleman there. I'm going to come to yourself.
Hi, Richard from Gloucestershire County Council. I know we're talking about rolling stock, but I just wanted to talk about stations again and access for all. One of our main railway stations doesn't have less than over 2 million passengers a year. We just don't think that's good enough. But we appreciate, having spoken to colleagues around just the engineering challenges involved with this, getting a compliant lifts and rattle ramp in the station, but also just the sheer amount of funding that's required to get a lift in, and the uncertainty around the Access for All programme. So I don't know if it's a question that can be answered, or whether should Access for All become more of a rolling programme, or is there a call to action there for GBR around the Access for All scheme? Are there other shorter term, cheaper measures we can be doing, like the waiting areas on platforms, for example, that we can advocate for in local government to the rail industry to make our stations more accessible in the meantime?
That's a good question. And particularly, so Access for All is part of every control panel period's funding, and it's probably one of the most consistent funding programmes that there has been in the lifetime of the railway. But in sort of 30 seconds, Access for All, how do we make it bigger and more effective and do more? Hannah?
I think the biggest challenge we have is the infrastructure that we're working with. We've got several Access for All programmes going on across our networks at the moment. It's a constant challenge. The project is live and the work has started, but actually the realism of that is that we're still battling against challenges. And how do we make a decision one way or the other to say, do we make a station fully accessible, or do we make it partially accessible? So do we do a little because we can't do a lot? And I think that's one really good question, because from a public perspective, well, if you've done that, why wouldn't you do that? So I think it's challenging. I think it's something that GBR need to build in to understand, actually, out of our stations that do have high footfall and do have areas where passenger assistance is required, do we have a bare minimum? Do we have an assistance waiting space? Do we have reliable passenger assistance? Do we have a lift? Do we have all those things? You know, we've just opened 3 new stations on the Camp Hill line in Birmingham, or access for all, lifts. We had a challenge ahead of time with ramps, and then also they're unstaffed stations because a lot of our stations are unstaffed. So then there's that factor that influences. So I think it absolutely needs to stay on the agenda, because that's what will lead to, it's a bit like talking about level boarding, isn't it? What good's level boarding if I can't reach the platform? So yeah, it does have a place, absolutely. It needs to feature in the GBR roadmap.
Thanks. Any other thoughts on cracking? Can we have a microphone to the front, please?
Hello, so I'm James from our profound deaf, where the cochlear implant now. So I think that I've been traveling on train for a lot, and there's a bit lots of change in compared to 10 years ago. Situation with the British Sign Language unit, obviously with language being recognised 2 years ago. I've been travel on the northern area, also network rail station, where there'll be a lot of change in the British Sign Language per people interpreter of how we actually going to make that as an opportunity for another train operation company to take up. I know that because of the retrofit cost, it could be a lot of money. How we can try to justify to another railway company that this is money.
Do you sign it?
Yes, I can
Yeah.
sign, yeah.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, that's no problem. Yeah, so it was talking sign.
Yeah, both.
So 13 years ago, there was a big sound. Lots of friends with people not see not wearing or BSL were trouble because no motion BSL, and now start to have a BSL displayed on in train station that area. I don't know. So it will be potential opportunity for lots of train to all the UK.
So how are we going to put BSL information to all of the UK? And Hannah, I know that with West Midlands you've got one trial underway, but what would you like to do? How do you feel you can make it better for customers?
I think the first thing is it needs to be real. I think there was a tendency, and we've spoke about avatars recently, haven't we, using avatars for BSL. But I think it's, when we think about GBR, we have an opportunity here to look at technology as a collective and provide some consistency in what we can do. So there's things like Interpreters Live. We know we've got BSL on customer information screens. We have certain staff that sign as well, and we've got all sorts of little tools that staff can use. But I'm a great believer in consistency, and I think as an industry, if we can be consistent, whatever station I go to, whatever train I board, then actually I'm going to have a positive experience. So for West Midlands, where we've trialled a number of different BSL options and sign language and things like that, actually, what's the right answer? Because I feel we've trialled a few and there is no clear answer, and I think we need to go back to inclusion by design and understand from people who use it what the usability is, and actually, is it of benefit? I think we need to go deeper into what we can do as an industry, rather than, oh, okay, at Telford you can scan this QR code and it will give you directions. If you go to Watford, it's on the BSL is on the screen. If you go to another station, you can use the Sign Interpreters Live app. So I think we need some consistency, and we need to be led by the stakeholder and by the people that are using the system.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and particularly as well, not relying on AI.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely,
yeah.
and thank you. Good question. I've been told that we're running over time. I'm going to get chided, no doubt, in about 2 seconds' time. So I'd like to bring it to a close. And particularly the message that I've heard today are about being consistent for customers. Use the data, and not just about the money, the economic benefits, the social benefits. Think about what the customer wants, leaving no one behind, and ultimately setting higher standards as we build and design for the future. But critically as well, allying to the customer and amplifying their voice. I think it's been a very insightful session. I just want to ask you to join me in thanking our panellists today. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you as well.